We are live. Neither of us is on screen yet, but we will be in just a moment. Turning on lights. Hello, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. Joining me today is, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Bianca, and I'm going to say my last name because it's hard for Brandon. Bianca Sibishan. I work here as an emotional wellness and executive functioning coach. I'm going to give a little bit of context, if that's okay with you. I'm coming from Romania. I'm just trying to let people understand why the accent. Where I work as a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist, I still do have that license, and I work online with people from Romania. But here I work online and in person as an executive functioning and emotional wellness coach.
Yeah, with a particular focus on parenting.
Yes.
And yes, Bianca and I are both licensed therapists. Bianca in Romania, me here in Illinois, in the US. But this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. This is just an open conversation. Bianca and I are here talking with one another, and we're doing our best to take into account who you all might be and what you're interested in, how you're being impacted by us, how we're coming across to you. For those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, we appreciate that because it gives us more information on which to base our guesses about who you are and what you're interested in, how we're impacting you. Bianca and I will start off by talking about whatever we're talking about. But for those of you who are willing and able, please jump in at any point. Don't worry about whether we're on topic or whether your comment is about what we're talking about. We go all over the place no matter what. That's just how conversations work.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that wasn't the case, we would rather talk about whatever it is that you all are interested in talking about. So don't worry about holding back or waiting. Feel free to ask questions or make comments just like any other conversation. We work with a therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the states of Illinois and Wisconsin. And as Bianca was mentioning, we also work with some coaches who work with people all over the world via the internet. All of our coaches do executive functioning coaching, but they all have additional specialties as well. Bianca said a bit about hers. We also have people who work with creativity and artists coaching and professional and business coaching. We will do our best to read out comments as they come in because we are streaming on 3 different platforms simultaneously. So you'll only each see the comments that are coming in from the platform that you are on. So we try to read them out so that if you're on Facebook and a comment comes from Twitch, you know what we're responding to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's mostly it. Yeah. Welcome, Bast Insider. I can't quite make out that emoji. I assume is a sugar cube. Oh, saying hi. Hello.
So I cannot see that part, so I'm letting you read the comments.
So Bianca and I were talking earlier before all this, as I always talk about, we have plenty of opportunities to talk. That's why we try and focus on what would be interesting or most useful to you all. But something that came up in that conversation that we hadn't had a chance to get around to yet, we were talking about the relief that people sometimes get when they get a diagnosis. Particularly, we were talking about ADHD, but this happens with a lot of things where not true of everybody. Sometimes you get a diagnosis and it makes you feel worse. Sometimes it doesn't do anything. But there are times where for people, getting an official diagnosis of something brings them a lot of relief. We were kind of talking about that. And specifically in the context of ADHD, because it can be different for different things. But a lot of what happens is that in our culture, so I'm just kind of picking up with some of what we're talking about. Our culture has a few things to it that we've talked about plenty. One of those is referred to as hyper individuality, which is like the idea that an individual person is responsible for all of the things that happen to him or them. Which is like not true at all. It's not. It's so ingrained in our culture that people don't even question it. It's like just how things are. And it can be almost shocking for people to learn that not everybody thinks about things in that way, that other places have more of, we evaluate things through the lens of like relationships or environment or just on a holistic sense.
Yeah.
Combine that with an over focus on cognition in our culture. And what that ends up being is that pretty much everybody in our culture believes that what an individual person thinks and feels, like an individual person's psychology or psyche, is way more impactful than it actually is in reality. We way over focus on it. One practical offshoot of that is that people tend to think, we've talked about a bunch, that if you want to do something, you do it.
Okay.
And if you don't do something, you don't want to, or you don't want to enough, whatever that might mean. In practical, it's like in the abstract, we can talk about it and debate it, and it's like abstract use of language. In practical terms, what it results in is people attempt to get other people and also attempt to get themselves to do things by what we'll first say is just like motivating them,
Yeah.
quote unquote, motivating them. Now, some of that is fine. Some of that is like incentivizing people, right? Giving them reason to do something or not do something.
Mm-hmm.
The specifics of how that's implemented can be problematic, but like the underlying idea of it is something that can work, right? Like offering somebody $100 to do something can change them from not doing it to doing it.
Correct.
Biggest problem is threatening punishment doesn't necessarily do that. So punishment, these terms come from what's called operant conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
where we're talking about what we do after something has happened in order to try and get that person or that entity to do that thing more or do that thing less. So anything that we're doing before the thing has happened is not operant conditioning, even though people think of it the same way. Punishment is when you introduce something into a person's experience that they don't like and don't want, or you take something away from them that they do like and do want. So if I take away your favorite toy, that's a punishment. Or if I hit you, that's a punishment, right? Punishment can be effective in what's called like extincting behavior, getting people to stop doing stuff. So if I do something and then I'm punished, I'm less likely to do that thing again. If I continue to do that thing and every time I do it, I get punished, theoretically, there's a point at which I no longer do that thing. Now, even when it's used in that way, where it can be effective, that is restricted to all that's actually happening is I am attempting to make sure that the person who enacts the punishment does not believe that I did the thing.
What do you mean?
Let's take a common, like simple example that like if I come home after curfew, then I get grounded, right?
Okay.
Well, we think of it, the people who are instituting the punishment think of it as, this will teach them not to be out late.
Okay.
But in reality, what happens? Well, if I'm out after curfew, but you never find out about it, I still don't get punished. And vice versa, even if I'm home before curfew, if you think I was out after curfew, I still get punished. Which means that the incentive is actually on trying to read and predict and manage how you think about things.
Mm.
Now, I can, in order to try and make it so that you don't think I'm out after curfew, one thing I can do is to not go out after curfew. But it's not the only option, right? So punishment doesn't tend to work very well in like any long-term meaningful way.
I agree.
It ruins relationships. If the person who is, if there's a relationship between the person who is being punished and the person who's doing the punishment, every time that punishment happens, it worsens the relationship. Not just in the sense of like, I don't like you because you're punishing me.
Mm-hmm.
That is almost
also
always the case.
okay.
But it's not necessarily always the case. But even if it's not, it still does now incentivize me to do what I can to make sure you think about me in a certain way. We don't need to go into all that right now. There's all kinds of problems. Another problem is that even if it's working well in the context of this relationship, as soon as you are no longer applying that punishment, I no longer have any reason to continue to do or not do the thing. So if it's something that you actually think is bad for me to do, you punishing me only stops me from doing it as long as you're around,
Mm-hmm.
which incentivizes me then to get out under that. Just as a quick aside, this general belief people have of like teenagers all, you know, they say, I hate you, you're ruining my life, but that's just teenagers. That's just how they are. That is not inherent to being a teenager. That's absurd. Like the idea of hormones and whatever, yes, there are hormones and there are things going on with teenagers. But the idea that somehow, like evolutionarily as a species, it we've evolved in such a way that like when people hit certain lifespan, they now automatically hate and reject the people that love them and care for them would not be a very good survival trait. What's happening is people don't like being controlled. And so if someone is controlling me, I'm looking for a way out of that control. And if I'm controlling my parent or my children, which is what many people think parenting is, it's just controlling your, and it's not to say you should never control or that you're bad if you use punishment, none of that. It's just to say the more that you're controlling your kids, the more that just like any other human, they're going to be looking to find a way out of that. And what tends to happen is as they start to become teenagers, they hit that time in their life is when they get more and more of an ability to get out from under that. They become more independent physically, right? They can travel different places and they establish other relationships outside of you and so on. Become less reliant on us. So it starts to manifest more and more. Some of that is there's all kinds of conversations to be had about what we mean by control, but certainly it's valid with some meanings of what we're saying there. Certainly it's valid. I would agree to say like we should have a lot of control over what's going on with our newborn, and then over time we should scale it back.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what's happening in those teen years is like a lagging indicator that like we should scale it back to this point optimally, but we're still trying to keep it here. And so natural conflicts and problems arise. The relevant point for what we were talking about and what I was trying to get into. Yeah, I think a lot of what people think of as teenage rebellion is just kids realizing you haven't given them a reason to actually listen to you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. I agree with you, absolutely. And I would say that a lot of that has to do with this misconception about operant conditioning. That like generally, obviously I'm not speaking for every person, but as a general thing, parenting is kind of conflated with operant conditioning. Like if you don't use rewards and punishments, you are not parenting your child, which is understandable why people think that way, but certainly interesting and concerning. And again, as we were saying earlier, threatening punishment is not operant conditioning. Threatening punishment, let me say that differently. Threatening punishment is not punishment. Here's something that often is going to get interpreted as just being like pedantic and it doesn't really matter, but it does matter in this conversation. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, people tend to think that that means reward and punishment. Both of those are reinforcement. Reinforcement means we want you to do the behavior again. So you could think of both of those as rewards. The technical term is reinforcement, not reward. But positive reinforcement means I am giving you something that you want or like as a reward to get you to do this thing again. Negative reinforcement means I am taking something away from you that you don't like and don't want in order to reinforce this behavior, influence you to do it again. So if, for example, let's say you're grounded and then you do something and now I say, you know what, you're no longer grounded because you did that thing. That's negative reinforcement. I just rewarded you by taking away something
that you don't like.
So threatening punishment, what it actually does is sets us up for negative reinforcement. It isn't reinforcement itself, but by threatening punishment, what we're doing then is we're like getting you to worry or fear or stress that something bad might happen unless you do whatever. And then if and when you do that thing, that stress and that worry and that fear goes away. So that's negative reinforcement. I got rewarded by this unpleasant worry and fear going away. Now, right off the bat, when I frame it that way, like you scoffed, most people's response is going to be some version of like, well, that's not great.
No, I was thinking about how many people you are touching with this conversation.
Because we do what's modeled for us. And so much of what people are talking about when they're talking about motivation and stuff is actually they're threatening punishment to themselves. They're making themselves feel worse, more stressed, more fearful, more anxious. I feel some unpleasant thing that I don't want to feel. And then when I do this thing, it goes away.
Yeah.
So much so that people will claim that that is just how things are. That people will say things like, I need stress to get moving on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or that if I, for example, say that it's better to do homework at 8 p.m. instead of 4 p.m., people will say, yeah, but I'm stressed out about it until then. Like that's a non-optional response that you have to be stressed out about it. And also as though changing the way that you feel is an important like value to the task. What ends up happening is with a lot of this stuff, how I feel if I do it or don't do it actually becomes my chief reasoning. If I do it, I'll feel good. If I don't do it, I'll feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time that's accurate. Sometimes it isn't. Actually, a lot of the time it isn't. But even when it's accurate, what that's done is we now don't pay attention to the actual thing itself. What is the value or importance of doing the thing? Actual reason, the probably most common reason I'll get when I talk to people about like, why is it so important to do that thing or not do that thing, is they'll say, because I'll feel so much better when I get it done. Or because I'm going to feel stressed until I get it done. We talk about how some things are actually, it's optimal to do those as late as possible before the deadline, meaning as late as you can start it while still being able to finish it by the deadline, not too late to finish it by the deadline. And when I say that, people are like, no, we should start early. We have whole conversations about it. And what everyone ends up coming back to is like, but I will stress until I get it done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of what we're talking about. The relief that people get when they get an ADHD diagnosis sometimes is in an effort. I believe that this is something that would be good for me to be doing. I should do it, whatever. And I'm not saying that we're wrong, right? This can be accurate, that this is really important for me to do. In an effort to get myself to do it, I start making myself feel bad. I choose that. I'm conscious, like I'm going to try to be, it just happens. But it is still true that's happening as a result of internal processes. I'm generating those senses of stress and disappointment or guilt or whatever. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
That is something that we're doing as an attempt. This is the explicitly stated thing. I'm doing that in order to get myself to do the thing. I'm making myself feel bad so that I will do the thing. But making yourself feel bad does not actually get you to do anything. It actually inhibits your ability to do anything. No one would claim, for example, that like, it's really important for me to do this thing, so I'm not going to get any sleep tonight because I think that will make me do the thing. Like, obviously, that would make it harder for you to do.
But they do, though. They do say that.
They do.
They do say that.
They don't usually frame it that way,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, people do think of it as like, well, I'll stay up until it's done, or I'll get up early, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But we all can generally recognize that, like, if you don't sleep, you're probably going to be worse at doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that we couldn't get someone to do something by like not allowing them to sleep until they do it? No, we could. Like we talked about incentive, right? Depending on the thing and the context, we absolutely could get someone to do something by saying you're not allowed to go to sleep until you do it. Would doing that thing be easier for them to do? Absolutely not. It's more important now because we're withholding sleep. So it becomes more valuable to do it. Does it become less costly? No. Way harder.
Well, for sure, there are moments when we love a white night stay to finish a task or something, but it's not sustainable long term. It's not a strategy that will help.
It is not sustainable long term, absolutely. And for the most of the stuff that we do it with, it doesn't help in the short term either. There are things where there's a reason we can stay up, right? We
Mhm.
have that ability. There are things where staying up to do it can be beneficial given the context,
Mm-hmm.
but that's almost never the stuff. Like staying up all night to study does not help you perform better on the test. It makes you perform worse.
Yes.
Mainly staying up or whatever, anything that involves cognition or intellect or whatever is going to get a lot harder for stuff that involves physicality. When we talk about fight or flight, that's a lot of what we're talking about. It's like we're shifting into things, I'm in do stuff mode. Adrenaline goes into my system. I get worse at thinking, literally prefrontal cortex shut down. I get worse at cognition, but in that moment, I'll have to pay for it later. But in that moment, I am now better suited to doing physical tasks, fighting or running away or whatever. Fight or flight is not just metaphorical. Everyone talks about it as though fight or flight is about how I feel, like anxiety and whatever.
Yeah.
But no, it's literally like many physiological changes can happen. And one of those is adrenaline getting dumped into your bloodstream. There's actual physiological changes taking place. And those changes are designed to shift us into a mode where taking physical action becomes easier, where using cognition becomes much more difficult.
Correct.
So it's not, fight and flight is not just a metaphor for getting anxious. It's literally the body getting ready to like attack or retreat or whatever, move. Anyway, I get into like Vaughn and Pre stuff and whatever too, all these weird understandings. Point is, the worse I feel, take any task, any person, any task. This person X is supposed to do task Y. The more stress they get, is it going to get easier or harder for them to do Y? Will their performance at Y get better or worse?
Everybody understands that when you put it like this, but then the idea is that we still think we still think that stress is kind of motivating us.
Right. Part of that, we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but part of that is as I get worse at using cognition, that also means I'm less able to like change thoughts and ideas about things. So if I'm doing this, obviously this is built on the idea that this is useful for me to do in some way. Not like a conscious thing that I thought in that moment or chose to do, but a result of learning that concept that like stressing out or stressing other people out, stressing yourself out is a good way to get people to do stuff. So if I'm doing that, that's already something that's involved in my unconscious, non-conscious processes. And as it's happening, I am not in a place where I can then like address and change that, because changing that would require cognition. So trying to explain that to somebody, that's why when people are like, hey, just choose to be happy, or just choose to be calm. We're saying use cognition to change how you're feeling in a state in which using cognition is like not really accessible to you, or not in a very efficient way anyway. So yeah, people do this. And as we talk about a lot, understanding this doesn't change it automatically. It definitely doesn't, it can't change it in the moment. But even beforehand or afterwards, that can lead to changes in the future. Just the understanding itself isn't likely to make much change. Maybe some, but it's hard to kind of measure exactly.
Right.
Because understanding isn't always the most important thing. This is a good point that like nobody taught you that explicitly. Well, I guess a lot of times people do say it, but generally we're not talking about that someone's like, hey, you need to feel guilty in order to get yourself to do stuff. Like that's not things people are saying. But we act as though it's true.
Exactly.
Or I didn't do something and now I come to you and I'm like, I am so sorry. I feel absolutely terrible about the fact that I didn't do that thing, is a way that I'm communicating to you that yes, I didn't do it. And that doesn't mean it's not important to me or that I don't care about it. So in a culture in which we believe that you do everything you want to do and anything you don't do, you just didn't want to do, what happens if I didn't do something that does matter to me? How do I communicate that to someone else? Often then just comes down to like, I didn't do it, but it's not because I didn't want to. I did want to. And no, you didn't do it, which is proof that you didn't want to. So you're just lying. How do I prove to you that I did is to say, look how much I'm suffering. I feel genuinely like I wouldn't do this just to tell a lie, beat myself up. Even if I was, it's still true that I feel bad, right? Like we learn that there's a lot of value in feeling bad, that says a lot about who you are as a person.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
One thing we talk about all the time is like, people will be struggling to do something. They're not doing it, or they're not doing it consistently, or not the way they think they should. They get whatever idea about what has to change, getting more motivated or whatever it is. They try stuff, doesn't work. They're still not doing it. And then we have a conversation about, well, so maybe your understanding or what you're trying is just not true, isn't going to work. We stick to it. Like, no, this is super important to do. I really should start early. I should start all my assignments the moment I get them. Am I passing all my classes? Am I starting it late? Like, yes. The only problem is actually that I feel really bad about the fact that I'm not starting it earlier. So the evidence suggests there that you're just wrong and you shouldn't be starting it early. But we get locked in on that idea. We get messed up about this stuff, that we need to feel bad about things to prove that, like, this is important to me.
You remember we had this conversation about how parents, when you ask them if they made their child feel good all day, would they consider themselves to be a good parent? And the automatic answer would be no, because kind of I'm not doing a great job if it's just being happy. I need to. That means I'm not restricting him or not doing things that are best for him.
Yeah, actually, so that same thing we were talking about is also true of individuals about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to sound ridiculous, probably, but the same people who will say, like, I just want to be happy, I don't want to be stressed, will also, not all the time, but will also sometimes, they've had a day where they just enjoyed the whole day and then come away from that and say, I was too lazy today, I should have done different things, that was bad. So yes, we have this built in, this idea in our culture, this idea that suffering is valuable in and of itself,
Mm-hmm.
which it is not. It is definitely true that there are some things which are valuable and suffering is entailed in those things, right? Like it's difficult to make changes or to improve at things. So those kinds of concepts of no pain, no gain, whatever,
Yeah.
like there's truth to like making yourself go through uncomfortable things. You grow as a result of those things. That doesn't mean that discomfort itself is beneficial. It isn't. That's just a cost that's worth paying.
Exactly.
So I'm not ever trying to say like people should never feel uncomfortable or be sad. In fact, we're talking all the time about you can't do
Yeah.
that. You wouldn't do it even if you had the choice. People would think that, but like no, you wouldn't take that because you know that change and discomfort is important.
Yeah.
But we put it at odds here, right? Like I should be able to just be happy. Well, then I do something and I'm happy, and then I come away and say, well, that was just a distraction. I should have focused on something else.
Correct.
Literally, people will be depressed and then say, well, I had a good day today, but that's just because I was distracting myself. It's like if the problem is the fact that you're sad and doing X means that you're not sad, how is that not the solution to the problem? Obviously, there are times where the thing what's making me sad is something that, you know, if I don't address it, it will continue to make me sad. If I do address it, it'll go away. So that's a lot of what people are referencing. Is like, I just distracted myself, meaning I wasn't sad because I was doing things that I enjoyed doing, but I didn't address the thing which is making me sad, which is fine. That is sometimes true, but it is true much more rarely than people think that it's true. It's not the most common thing. Mostly our emotions are in response to like very fleeting momentary things, not generally overarching things. Not never, but not generally. As Caduceus Clay would say, pain doesn't make people, it's love that makes people. The pain is inconsequential, it's love that saves them. Yeah, right? Like, the problem isn't the important part. The solution that was derived is the important part. I like that. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I was thinking about how the simplest things are, and we tend to overcomplicate things. So we tend to do that in our parenting, in our lives, and yeah, and the solutions sometimes are very simple, but there. You know that saying, we have that saying in Romanian. I don't know if you have it here, the common sense is not that common. I mean, you see that this is so simple to do, but you feel like it has to be more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, that is a, I don't know that I'd say a saying, but it's like a quote that common sense isn't common or whatever.
Mm.
One thing I like to try and point out when we're talking about like accomplishment equation stuff is that simple and complex, that scale, what we're talking about there is how much resources, how much does it cost to understand what to do?
Yeah.
Separately from that, easy or hard is about how much resources does it cost to accomplish the thing altogether. So that's understanding, ideation, understanding what to do, and execution, doing the thing. So it is possible for tasks to be very simple and very difficult, because even though it's easy to understand, it doesn't take a lot to understand what to do. It takes a lot to do it. It isn't possible to be very complex and very easy, because if it takes a lot just to understand it, then it takes a lot to do it all together. There's a book series that references this concept a lot, and the example that it uses is pushing a car up a hill is a very simple task, but a very difficult one. And yeah, we make things complicated. I agree. That's one way of talking about like how cognitively oriented we have become as individuals and as a culture, that we are treating, like we talked about at the beginning, that we're treating cognition as though it's like the only thing that matters. If you understand things, then the problem goes away. To the extent that as therapists or coaches, whatever, people come in and they just want to understand stuff. Why is this happening? Unless, even if we answer that question, which is never answerable definitively, we can look at variables that impact it or that seem to impact it. We can never say these are all of the variables, nothing else is relevant. But even if we could, that would still only matter if we then transition that into, so therefore, here's what to do about it.
Correct.
Understanding in and of itself doesn't do anything. Now, there's an exception to that, but there's a couple. But also, how can I know if I'm trying hard and deserve praise if I'm not suffering? Yeah, absolutely. Oversimplification is the product of overthinking, but I kind of like the joke of, well, overthinking is better than unthinking. I kind of like that joke too. I think I know what you mean with that first statement about oversimplification being the product of overthinking, but I'm not sure that I know what you mean there. And either way, the point is that each thing is distinct from each other thing. Like some things, the more you think about it, the harder it is, the less likely. Everybody who's ever sat there trying to fall asleep and got in your head thinking like, come on, I just need to fall asleep. Like trying to think your way into, the more you try to think your way into falling asleep, you can't. It makes it worse. We often talk, overcomplicate. I meant overcomplication. Overcomplication is the product of overthinking. Sure. We talk about it in the realm of sports often, that like, if you're thinking about it, it gets in the way of what you're doing and makes you worse at it. There's common jokes about, it's like act natural. It's like, I don't know what to do with my hands. You know, as soon as you start thinking about it, now it makes it so you can't do it. Then there are some tasks where like, if you don't think at all, it's going to be a problem. Some tasks that are primarily about thinking, especially academic tasks, which are what we're all taught are super important to do our entire childhood. I love, by the way, which I mean, I think it's kind of funny, but not great, that we as a culture tend to talk so much about how important your childhood is. When we do psychoanalysis and whatever, everyone's constantly talking about early memories and what happened in their family or what their parents are like and whatever. Part of the reason we do that, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but part of the reason we do that is because there's a lot more variation between people in their home lives than in their school lives, right? Obviously, different people have different experiences in school, but it's much more standardized. You know, what my life is at home with my parents or siblings or whatever can be a lot different from the norm, where, you know, what my experience at school is less likely to be that far from the norm.
Okay.
But that kind of leads to us just ignoring school, which then later gets, we ignore work. When people talk about like how they're lonely, they're very rarely factoring in their work in their analysis. We're kind of just, without anyone stating it explicitly, we get the messaging constantly of like, that part doesn't matter. Partly because we think of it as nobody questions that it's new or different or whatever. It's like, well, that's how it's always been. So that's all. But it is not how it's always been. It's not even close to how it's always been. It is a choice, and it's a lot of choices. And even right now in this very moment, how it is in different countries or different regions of the same country is very different. But we're not generally talking, like when somebody's talking about how they're anxious, and people will often get into like, well, my mom, you know, would get emotional unexpectedly, so I'm always on edge or whatever. And generally, when it comes to analysis, we're not talking about like, well, you spent from the age of 5 to the age of 18 on average, maybe 22, whatever, in a context in which you were being told that everything that you were asked to do was incredibly important, and that if you failed to do any of it or did any of it poorly, that you were told that that like had long-term ramifications for you as a person and how your life will be.
Mm.
That like at the age of 10, I have a 9-year-old, and you can imagine, I can also confirm how we in our family talk about like school in terms of college and how important it is to get good grades, whatever. Because for the most part, it's not important at all, but it's not really that important.
I want to know, how do you talk about this kind of stuff?
Well, we can talk more about that, but finish that point is that like we don't talk about it that way, but still for over a year, he's been talking about like what colleges he might want to go to. Some of that comes from like the way that people talk about college athletics. You know, like he knows colleges that have well-known football teams better than he knows other colleges. Some of that is about we live in a socioeconomic, like upper middle class to upper class area. And so people's parents generally have gone to colleges that are relatively well-known and prestigious colleges. Kids are wearing their Notre Dame shirts at school because their parents are Notre Dame alum and they watch Notre Dame football, or Michigan shirts. From the very jump, it's bleeding in from everywhere. The idea that everyone is given in school is that there are ways to be able to rank people against one another in regards to some very, very important characteristics.
What do you mean about that?
Meaning, getting an A is better than getting a C, right? Getting 100% is better than getting an 80%. These are unequivocal statements that are made. Of course, people sometimes talk about like, oh, it's not important, it's about learning, whatever. I'm not saying nobody thinks that or ever says that, but that's not what's actually communicated. Hi, coach. Ha ha ha. Your childhood, referencing me, was far from the norm. And hello, Bast. No matter the intentions of an individual adult, a teacher, even a school, whatever, the system is constructed in such a way where it doesn't matter if what I think is like we're all just learning and growing, whatever. It is, whether I like it or not, it is a competitive system. Yeah. I might not talk about that or focus on it very much in kindergarten or first grade, but we all know that at the end of high school, getting into, if you move on from there, which is universally talked about as a good thing to do in our culture, I guess I can't say actually universally, but very rare for anybody to be saying that going to college might be a worse option than not going to college. Very rare for anybody to say that going to a lower prestige college might be a better option than going to a higher prestige college. When it does get talked about, it's usually through the lens of like, well, if you can't afford it, right? But like, if you can get in and you can afford it, the highest prestige college is the best thing to do. That's not really a question. Even if you're somebody who like, I don't really care about that stuff, whatever. If you look at like, what books or articles or podcasts do you listen to or read, you'll still find there's a lot of like Harvard people and Yale people and all of that. And it'd be pretty hard for you to say like, oh, I read that book by that dude who went to that one, you know, Orange Coast Community College or whatever. Right? Miles, my 9-year-old, should go to Eton. His kindness would be such a great influence, ultimately influencing even the world. I'm saying that no individual person is doing anything wrong. Everything is set up the way that it is for reasons that solve problems. And generally, the way something is better than the way it was before that solution came into place. That doesn't mean that there aren't better options now. And sometimes it is even worse than it was before, but for the most part, we solve problems and it's better than it was.
Yeah, I was not thinking, and I was not thinking about this that much, but you are so right. Yeah, we always think about childhood, especially now when our kids are spending like 8 hours a day at school, and we just take that out of the context, and yeah.
My children certainly, when it's like a full week of school, right, spend more of their waking time in that week, even counting the weekend, spend more of their waking time in school than out, right? Yeah. Like there's an hour in the morning before they go to school, but a lot of that is still taken up by getting ready for school. Then they're in school for 7 hours. Then they come home, although a lot of the time there's other activities. We as a family don't tend to do a lot of like before or after school activities. My oldest does do orchestra before school. I had to drop him off at 7:30 this morning for orchestra every Monday and Wednesday. But a lot of time people do school-based activities. Even when they're not like through the school, a lot of these activities are structured very similar to how school is structured. But even without that, they get home and they've got what, 4 or 5 hours for bedtime. How much of that time is dedicated to having to do school-related activities, homework, or other things like that? Yeah, no. And then we talk about ourselves and each other as though like that's not relevant. We talk about our issues being. I can't tell you the number of times that I've worked with someone who is an artist and they're struggling to like what they're wanting to focus on is that they want to be working on their art, but they're not working on their art. They don't know what's going on. And they will say something to the effect of like, I don't know what's going on because I used to do it all the time. Because I'll ask questions about like what makes you think that that's a good way to do it or whatever. Mm-hmm. I used to work on my art all the time. I used to do it hours and hours a day, every day. And they have a job now and they didn't then. Mm-hmm. But when I ask the question of like, okay, so if you used to do the art more and now you're doing it less, that's got to mean there's other stuff that you were doing less that now you're doing more. And they're like, no, I'm just not doing anything as much. Until I have to point out, like, you're working now. Like, well, sure, but that's a good thing because now I have more money and like whatever. Not as in like, yeah, I'm spending. Yes, I used to play guitar 3 to 4 hours a day, every day for a couple of years. But I was working part-time intermittently and I didn't have kids. Now I play guitar. Sometimes I do it relatively regularly, but I just played yesterday for the first time in like 3 months. My guitar had dust on it.
Yeah. And that's something that you can see also in parents, not, trying to be their version of they were before the kids and feeling guilty for not doing some stuff that they did before. You don't have the time now.
Yeah. Yep. This is a lot of the guilt and the stress that comes in is that people identify that what they should be doing, if you add that all up, is more than any person can do. It's not possible to do. But they're not adding it all up. They're just looking at each individual thing and they think, well, this is important to do and that's important to do. There's nothing I can give up. But if you think there's nothing you can give up, that doesn't mean that you don't give anything up. You still can't do all that, so you don't. But then you're like, wait, what's wrong? And back to where we started is, well, now I'm feeling stressed and guilty and an effort because I'm acting, even if I don't think it, I'm acting as though if I just want it enough, if I think about it enough and care about it enough, then I'll get everything done, which isn't true and actually makes it so that you're doing less because now you're spending some of your resources on feeling bad. Mm-hmm. So you're doing even less and now you panic and you try harder, which makes it so you do even less. And it is a bad cycle and people will come to us in that, like, it's getting worse, I'm not doing anything. And then when we talk about some of the stuff we talk about, they often respond as like, no, you don't understand. This is super urgent and super bad. It has to be dealt with. Where they're just continuing the same thing. I have to feel really bad about this. I have to treat it as so. We do the same thing for our kids. We teach them without meaning to that, like, hey, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Like, I am very well aware, my wife and I both are very well aware that, at least in the area where we live, kids are way overbooked.
Oh, yeah.
Way overbooked. It's absurd. That doesn't mean that there's never a time where we're like, oh, everybody else's kid is doing more stuff, but we're not doing enough stuff. Or where it's like, well, all those other kids, all his friends are signing up for this thing, and we know he would like to also do it with them, so let's sign him up for that. And so we still get pulled into signing up for more things and more things. And we're nice people, and we love our kids, and our kids know that, and they love us. The better the job we do, the more that's true. And so then they look and they learn from what we do, not what we say. And they learn that, like, my wife and I are not the best at sleeping well. We don't prioritize getting enough rest for ourselves. We push ourselves really hard. We're just used to it. Our children have like bags under there. Like they also don't sleep. Yeah. Not nothing at all, right? Like not to an unhealthy extent, or well, I guess it depends on what you mean by unhealthy, but yeah, we all want to like, for the most part in our culture, if you gave people, here's a button you can press, and if you press it from now on, you can get all the benefits of 8 hours of sleep by just snapping your fingers. Like everyone would press that. Be like, yeah, 8 extra hours, awesome. I know sometimes people will be like, no, no, I love sleep. But generally,
Yeah, they also
the people
said
who
they
say that
need
the most
more
are
time.
also, the more that someone's like, I love sleep, the more likely it is that they're tired a lot, which means the more likely it is that they're a person who doesn't sleep, who chooses other things besides sleep. And I don't just mean pushing yourself. I myself struggle sometimes with like, I'm reading a book and this part's really interesting. I'm falling asleep. And I'm like, no, I don't want to fall asleep. And I like wake myself back up to read more or whatever. I went to see a dad son guitar piano piece on video. That was right. Anyway, we are raised to believe in what's called a zero sum philosophy. Zero sum meaning there's a finite amount of stuff, and so for anyone to have more of something, someone else has to have that much less of something.
Okay.
The best, most wonderful parents, all parents, no matter how good and kind and loving, you ask them and they will talk to you. I myself will talk to you about like wanting to set our kids up to live a good and happy life. What's the premise under that is that it is not possible for all people to live good and healthy lives or good and happy lives. That some people are going to have crappy ones, and we got to try and do what we can to make sure that our kids have good ones. Now, what thing you focus on can change, right? For most people, that's going to end up focusing on like doing really well in school so that they can get a really good job. That's going to be the primary factor, making sure they're really smart. For everybody, there's going to be at least, not everybody, for most people, there's going to be at least some element of like teaching them how to be nice people, how to get along with one another, how to be resilient, how to problem solve, like soft skill stuff too. But it's still underlying everything is this idea that if we mess up, our kids might have bad lives. And then we think that our kids are not going to pick up on that and internalize that same thing, that like, if I mess up, I might have a bad. We literally, especially as they get older, we literally tell them like, people who go to this kind of school and get this kind of job or make this amount of money are really well off. And people who go to this kind of school or get this kind of job or make this amount of money have terrible lives. And then we say that like whether or not you do this piece of homework right now is directly indicative of whether you will go to a good school and make. If you ask people, they will say, I gotta get, why do you have to do this assignment? Because if I don't want to get a bad grade. Okay, so you think you need good grades to support to get good grades? Yeah. Why? Because if I don't get good grades, I won't get into a good school. I need to get good grades so I can get into a good school. Why does it matter to get into a good school? So I can have a good job. Why does it matter to have a good job? So I can have a good life. That's like, I'm not making this up. You can say that to almost anybody. Start the phrase, I got to get good grades so that I can get into a good school, so that I can get a good job, so that I can, and people will finish it with, have a good life.
Yeah.
We literally have like our 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds out there. I'm not exaggerating. People, I've talked to a lot of kids, will say exactly to me, like, I don't want to end up on the street, as though that's a thing that might happen if you don't do your homework. Yeah. It's all understandable, and no individual person is doing anything bad or wrong. It's just how things are structured.
That also comes a lot from, I don't know what you said about threatening punishment, also threatening this idea in our kids. If you don't do that, you will end up on the street.
Right. But like, I'll just straight up say right now, my kids are not ending up on the street. Barring like world-changing catastrophes, my children are not in danger of ever ending up on the street. Like, I'm not a wealthy individual personally, but I make enough that like I can say, all three of my children, I mean, they're 9, they're 6, and they're 4, currently live with me, right? Like, I have enough living space to house all of my children. There is no point at which any of them would not be able to live in my housing with me. That's not to say that like living on the street is the only thing to worry about and there's no other variation of how your life is. It's just, these are absurd things.
Yeah, but mostly come from a place of love that parents have for the kids and that fear of. I don't believe that any parent is just trying to and think about it like I'm going to scare him that so he can just I'm trying to manipulate him in some way. No, they don't think that
No,
is it like that.
I mean, sometimes parents do, but generally, no. No. But like, if a person believes that, like, if I do a good job parenting, my kid will be, able to regulate their emotions well,
Mhm.
then that also means that what they believe, even though they wouldn't say this part, is if my child is not regulating their emotions well, it's because I did a bad job parenting. And people won't say that part. When that part happens, they're like, no, that's because they have anxiety. This is, by the way, part of the reason that we talk about these things like they're diseases,
Mhm.
especially ADHD and autism, which are conditions that by and large are designed, they're meant to be in reference to children. Until very recently they were almost exclusively until very recently they were literally exclusively applied to children. That used to be part of the diagnostic criteria until pretty recently. And even still, it's way more. Go Google anything about ADHD or autism and compare all of the resources and stuff you find, how much of it is talking about kids.
Mhm.
Part of the reason for that is because as a parent, I'm not going to say this out loud, but if I do say that it's my responsibility to like train them or whatever, which we say that, that also means that if they're struggling with something, that I've failed. I feel really bad and I don't want to say that. And that incentivizes me to look for any other explanation, right? Is there some way that what I'm doing could be the right thing to do and yet they still are struggling with this thing anyway? And then someone's like, well, yeah, if their brain's wired wrong, like, okay, that's what it is. No self-examination required. And also because the real problem usually isn't something that parents can find by self-examination, because the real problem is about larger structural things than that. Uh, hold on, I missed a comment here. I would give a lot of my non-existent money to be able to just make time stop for a while. I get that. Maybe it helped me to not have a lot of parental pressure growing up. I always wanted to go to college because all the career paths I was interested in required a degree. I felt more pressure in that if I didn't do well, I was closing out future opportunities that would help me in my goals. Yeah, so there's a really good example, like we were talking about before, that like even if you as a parent are not doing this,
Mhm.
it's still like you didn't make up those ideas, right? Somehow, some way, you got messaging, understandings that like these are the kinds of things that I would enjoy doing. Which I'm not saying that's not accurate, but like you had to hear about some things and get information about what they entail or what they're like. And it's not a coincidence that those are all things that you got to go to college for. I mean, if you polled all the kids in the United States right now about like what jobs are you interested in, like by and large, they're going to be jobs that involve going to college, right?
My daughter says she wants to be a dog sitter because she likes dogs. No.
Yeah, the younger you are, the more you're going to get other things. Because as I just said, in order for me to think about wanting to do this, I have to be aware of it. That's why, especially the younger you go with kids, ask them what they want to do, you're going to get stuff that their parents do, teaching, because they all have teachers, they go to school.
Mhm.
Stuff that involves being famous because they're aware of those things like acting, being an athlete, whatever. Or like stuff that a lot of children's literature is about, basically. You get a lot of like, I want to be a firefighter or police officer, not necessarily because they're seeing a lot of that, so much as like they're police officers and firefighters and nurses and doctors are in like.
Correct, but now pointing back to what you were saying, I found myself when she was saying that, do you want to be a vet, mom? And then I was, what am I doing? Let her dog sit if that's what she wants for now. But yeah, you as parents, you want to always to, yeah, I know that pressure that you're putting on them.
Yeah, I mean, something that happens around here, and this is a relatively common thing in certain areas. I forget what they call it. It's different things at different places, like senior day or whatever, where in the spring every year, all of the seniors in the high school, they wear something like a shirt or a hoodie or whatever with the school that they've been accepted to, that they're going to go to.
Okay.
So like I've gotten accepted to University of Michigan. That's where I'm going to go. So on senior day, I wear my University of Michigan hoodie or t-shirt or whatever. Now, is anybody bad for wanting to celebrate? No, of course not. Like, especially we've just made the last several years of your life revolve around going to school. You've been thinking about it and putting so much into it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got it done. You want to celebrate. If you're proud of the school you got into, you want to celebrate even more. But even if it's like not a school that you think other people will be impressed by, you still can be proud of, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm done, I'm going on, you know. So that's great. Makes sense. And what are we going to do? Ban kids from like wearing stuff? No. So it makes sense, especially then, to have a day where we're like, hey, let's just all do it. And what about the kid who tried to get into school and didn't get anywhere? What does that kid do during that day? They just don't wear anything? Or do they just like buy a Notre Dame hoodie and wear that and tell people that's where they're going? Is anybody wearing like, you know, Lakeshore Community College shirts on those? Like, no, not really. Parents around here, they get bumper stickers to put on their car or in the back of their windshields with the name of their schools, the schools that their kids are going. Again, are you bad for being proud? No, of course not. You're proud. Proud of your kid and what they're doing. You're proud even of your own efforts too, because you put a lot into helping them to get there. Nothing wrong with that. But it does, combined with a bunch of other things, still contribute to a culture in which people are constantly told that if they're not smart, they're bad.
Yeah.
The amount of pressure that kids feel. If you think that kindergartners do not feel pressure about performing well at school, you just have not met a kindergartner in a long time. My mom tells me stories, and I'm not saying I'm like the typical case here, but like the day that she couldn't find me for 10 minutes, was freaking out trying to find me, and eventually found me in a closet, like quietly crying because I got one of the spelling words wrong on the spelling test that day. It was the first time I had gotten a 100, you know. Oh, that sounds like an awful practice. It's like a day of public shame. Oh, I didn't know that my profession existed until undergrad, but I latched onto it really quickly once I knew it was a thing I could do. Right. And there's, again, nobody's doing anything wrong, and the system is the way it is for reasons. That doesn't mean it couldn't be better or that there's no problems with it. There's problems. But there are reasons that those things happened. Doesn't mean it's the best way it could be. But yeah, it is like a day of public shaming for some kids. And for some kids, it's a day of celebration and joy and finding out where all of your friends are going, and, you know, seeing other kids in the hall that are wearing the same t-shirt that you're wearing that you haven't met before. And you're like, hey, you're going to this school too? Like, let's connect and exchange. Like, there's a lot of great. And also, yeah, some kids are going to feel like crap. But that's going to happen with everything, right? Like, if somebody wins prom king and queen, other kids are going to feel, not all of them maybe, but some kids are going to feel worse about it. If somebody gets an A, other kids are feeling bad about getting a B or a C or an F.
Yeah. And that being said, I think most of the hours I talk about myself as a mom is not, which is not okay. I'm not saying this proudly, but trying to take that pain away from them. You know, that's why that I think this is a lot of parents have this idea. Okay, I'm just pushing it for his school because I don't want him to feel bad when everybody's going to I don't know what college and he's not.
Oh yeah, we got to wrap up here, but I'll say that one thing I've seen a lot is children, you know, especially like high school age kids or whatever, engaging in sports to a very high degree, right? Like they're in, or even younger age, right? Like they're in travel hockey and they do these like weekend tournaments, and now they're on the high school hockey team, and like they're at practice hours and hours a day, every day, and they're just obsessed with it and whatever. And then so often the parent will say like, I didn't push that on them. That's what they wanted to do. Like they chose that. I don't know. Like that seems like a lot to me, because parents are aware of this idea that some parents are like, you will do this thing. And we all know that's bad. And we don't want anybody else to think that that's us. Even for the parents that is them, kind of, they don't want anyone to think it's them. So there's a lot of incentive to be like, look, you know, it's what makes them happy. It's what they want to do. It seems like too much to me, but I don't want to get in the way. I have never, ever, ever heard a parent be like, my kid plays so much video games, like hours a day, every day, whatever. But like, that's what makes them happy. That's what they chose. It's not really what I think, you know, is great, but I don't want to get in their way. No, that's only ever said about something that like, I do like that they're doing it. I think it's good that they're doing it. I just want to be clear that like, so we're very selective about well, they really want to do this, so I should sign them up for soccer. Great. Well, they really want to do this, but no, you can't play iPad or whatever for another. Like, so yes, what you're talking about, we do a lot of this where it's like, no, this isn't about it's not that I'm going to be embarrassed if my kid doesn't get into a good school. It's that it's going to be bad for them. And then we build these justifications, and we're not like tricking or lying to ourselves. We're not like aware that it's actually, we're going to be embarrassed. We actually believe like, no, this is just about what's good for them. And then what ends up happening a lot of the time is I'm now interacting with my child in a way that is obviously not good for them or me or our relationship. We're fighting all the time. We hate each other. Like, we're barely ever interacting in any way other than like sniping at each other or trying to avoid each other or whatever. But in my mind, I'm like, this is what's good for them. I have to do this. And I'll tell you straight up right now, this is not me making this up. Wait. But mom, I'm internationally ranked in Apex. I need to play 6 hours a day to maintain my ranking. Dude, we could do hours of conversation on how people view digital media and video games, especially when it comes to kids, and how, well, I almost swore, but I don't usually swear on the street, how absurdly messed up those things are, and how everybody is so confident that their opinions about this is great, even though the actual evidence across the board is that it is a terrible, terrible way to think about and look at these things. My wife and I are watching a show, High Potential, that's like, it's not great, but it's all right. And like some of the actors are fun and whatever. They did an episode involving somebody who used to be a professional video gamer. And the whole episode was set up as like a special message, like they show scenes of the person talking to their child about video games and how dangerous video games can be and how addictive. Major plot line was like, this guy was addicted to video games. It was the person whose job was playing video games was addicted to video games and had to quit, and we had to get him to quit and whatever. Ever heard any of these shows or any movie ever being like, this person is addicted to work, not meaning like they work too much or whatever, but as in like, this is an addiction exactly like being addicted to cocaine or whatever. Literally in the show references like, hey, gaming lights up the same dopamine receptors as whatever, which I said that we could talk about it, and now I am. But just to be clear, I'll make the most important point, leave the other criticisms for later. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with sense of pleasure and accomplishment. We call it the reward chemical. This is very important, especially for people who associate with like ADHD. Anytime any person ever feels any sense of joy, pleasure, accomplishment, dopamine is involved in that. It is not some things involve dopamine and some things don't involve dopamine. To say that video games light up dopamine receptors, which is a ridiculous way to say it. To say that playing video games gives you dopamine, as though that is not also true of like going on a date with someone that you like, or gardening if that's, or literally doing anything that you like. But no one's ever like, this person is addicted to playing with his children. It's a real problem. And people will talk to ADHDers as like, I have to do this to get a dopamine hit, as though that's in some way different from anyone else saying like, I like doing something. Anyway, this kid is clearly addicted to football. We need to get them help, right? Don't say that. Even kids, like this is a well-known thing, right? That like some people use anabolic steroids in order to increase their muscle mass. Sometimes it's just for show, to look built or whatever. Sometimes it is involved in sports. We know this. We know like that's not, no parent would claim like, I don't think any child is doing that. We know that. But you hear any conversations about like we as a culture allow kids to play too much sports or focus on it too much? What are the drugs that kids are doing in order to be better at playing video games? To be clear, some kids do, especially if they're going for professional gaming. Yeah. There's plenty of drug use involved in that, as there is in all professional competitive endeavors. Like, it's your job. You're looking for anything that you can do that will give you an advantage when it's a competitive job. So that's true. But nobody talks about that. Like generally, if I asked a random parent, like, are kids taking drugs in order to be better at video games? They would be like, no. Then why are you complaining about the video games so much when you know that kids are? How many people do you know? Do you know that are like, yep, I'm 40 years old and my shoulder has been a problem for me for my entire life and caused me pain because of high school athletics. I messed up my knee playing football in high school and it's still bad. Like lifelong injuries.
Not to talk about the brain injuries for a
Yeah, not even
player.
talking about
Yeah.
the brain injuries, which by the way, I have known, interacted with, worked with many people with concussions. I know of a kid who had to like relearn how to read after a concussion in middle school. I know of children who had significant personality changes and memory issues for 6 months after a concussion from playing football. If any of that even remotely was involved in playing video games, do you think anybody would be like, hey, this stuff is important, it builds character, we still got to do it, those are just the risks? No. Anyway, we do have to wrap up, but I want to leave this point. This is like the main point from earlier, is feeling bad about anything makes it harder to do anything and everything. That doesn't mean that it never makes sense to feel that way or that you're bad or wrong for feeling bad. I'm just pointing out the reality of the more stressed, the more anxious, the more scared, the more guilty you're feeling, the more sad, the more lonely, whatever, the harder it is for you to do anything. So any belief that feeling that way makes you better at doing stuff is related to the idea that if I feel bad, I might be more willing to do stuff. So we're just, and that's not untrue. That's true. It doesn't always work that way, but at least in theory, it's true that the worse I feel about something, the more valuable I consider it, the more important I consider it. But this is just yet another problem from people not paying attention to the fact that stuff has costs and humans aren't infinite and you can't just do anything and everything. So you're not bad for feeling that way. There are reasons that you feel that way. And me helping you understand this, even if I'm able to, won't change it automatically. It might change it a little bit in the future. But more, it might open you up to thinking about it and perceiving it in different ways. You might now want to change it. Will that change it on its own? No, that's the whole point. Wanting to do something doesn't just accomplish it. But if I want to do something, I'm much more likely to be able to do it. I'm much more likely to see things in different ways, see opportunities that I would otherwise miss. It's not helpful. We can't have people running around. This is a very common thing for parents or people around our age to say these days, right? So all the kids are depressed and anxious these days. This is a real problem. Which, okay, fine. Let's go with that premise. The person who is talking about that, the person who is saying all of the kids are depressed and anxious these days, that's a real problem. How is that person feeling in that moment? Are they anxious about this? If you're talking about how it's a big problem that everybody's anxious, you're anxious in that moment. So is it good to be anxious or not? Right? If I say, yeah, I'm not worried about that. And your response is like, no, this is a big problem. You should be worried. You're sitting here telling me that it's good to be anxious. So why are you concerned about the kids being anxious if you think it's good? This is the biggest reason that we talk about screens. So I want to be clear. I am not saying that there are no issues involved with digital technology or social media or that there's nothing to take a look at. There's all kinds of things to take a look at. But it's not at all what people think that it is.
This is very controversial. We need to have a session just about this.
A large part of the reason it gets talked about the way that it is genuinely, very nakedly as a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
There's big and bad and scary things happening, and I don't know what's going on. My child is getting mad at me. It's because of that damn phone. We'll connect it to anything.
Yeah, that's true.
My kid is disrespectful. It's because of those phones. My kid doesn't want to do the things I tell him to do. My kid is tired. We know, for example, that teenagers don't do well before 11 a.m. My kid has a hard time getting up for school in the morning. It's because of the phone. Kids are depressed and anxious these days. It's because of phones. Divorce rates are through the roof because of phones and social media, which divorce rates aren't through the roof. They're way down from what they used to be, but we don't think about it. Anything gets blamed on it. I read a study not too long ago. This is an official study published, right? on what was deemed phubbing, phone snubbing, which means you and I are in the same physical presence of each other, but instead of engaging with each other, we're looking at our phones.
Okay.
They called it phone snubbing. And they did a study, and shockingly, in relationships and marriages where there's more phubbing, the relationship satisfaction, the marital satisfaction is lower. There's a correlation that the more that people, even though we're in the same room, are looking at their phones separately, the worse they feel, the less satisfied they are in their marriage. And so then the study gives the recommendation, hey, you should not do this. You should put your phones away and connect with each other.
Mhm.
As though obviously what's happening here is we're looking at our phones and that makes us less satisfied, as opposed to like, maybe you and I don't get along so well,
That's why we're looking at it.
and so we don't interact as much.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, if we don't like each other as much, we're not going to interact as much. But that's never talked about. Scapegoats, man. I gotta go. We gotta wrap up. I got another meeting that I'm late.
Okay.
Good to be with you. Thank
Good
you.
to be with you.
Good to be with you all. We'll be back next week.
Bye.
We went all over the place.